on the eastern shore of Maryland, where the Tuckahoe Creek meanders gently toward the Chesapeake Bay, a quiet world unfolds in the early morning light. The air is heavy with the scent of wet earth and wild honeysuckle. Among the tall grasses and ancient oak trees stands a small wooden cabin, its timbers weathered to a silvery gray. Here, in this humble dwelling, a child named Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey first opened his eyes to the world. The year was 1818, and the landscape was one of rolling fields and winding waterways, dotted with the occasional plantation house. In the soft hush of dawn, the song of the mockingbird mingles with the distant murmur of the creek, and the first golden rays of sunlight spill across the porch where an old woman rocks gently, humming a spiritual. The young boy, known as Freddie, spends his days exploring the edges of the river, his bare feet sinking into the cool mud. He watches the dragonflies dance over the water, their wings catching the light like tiny panes of stained glass. The creek is his classroom, teaching him the rhythm of the seasons and the patience of watching the slow drift of a leaf on the current. He listens to the rustle of the cornfields and the whisper of the wind through the pines. Nature offers a kind of freedom no human hand can take away, a space where his spirit can expand without bounds. Even as a small child, he senses that this world of water and wood is a gift, a quiet sanctuary that will stay with him all his life. Inside the cabin, the floor is packed clay, smooth and cool beneath his small feet. The single room is dim, lit only by the glow of the hearth fire and the thin light that slips through the gaps in the log walls. His grandmother, Betsy Bailey, moves with the slow grace of age, her hands steady as she stirs the iron pot of hominy. The firelight flickers across her face, carving lines of wisdom and sorrow. She hums melodies that carry the weight of an older world, tunes passed down from across the ocean. Freddie curls up on a pallet near the warmth, his eyelids growing heavy as the smoke curls upward and vanishes into the shadows of the rafters. In this small circle of light, there is a profound sense of safety and love. The boy rarely sees his mother, Harriet, who works on a distant farm. But on the nights when exhaustion does not keep her away, she makes the long journey on foot, walking 12 miles under the cover of darkness just to lie beside her son. He remembers the soft creak of the door, the gentle weight of her body settling on the straw, and the way she pulls him close without a word. The moonlight streams through the chinking, painting stripes of silver across the floorboards. In that quiet hour, before she must rise and hurry back before dawn, there is only the rhythm of her breathing and the steady beat of her heart against his ear. These visits are rare treasures, imprinted on his memory like lullabies. Beyond the cabin, the woods stretch deep and shadowed, threaded with deer trails and the persistent trickle of hidden springs. Freddie wanders among the towering oaks and beeches, his hand brushing the rough bark as he walks. The canopy overhead fractures the sunlight into a mosaic of golden coins scattered on the forest floor. He learns the calls of the birds and the secret language of the squirrels. In these woods, he can forget for a time the boundaries imposed on his life, the fences that hem in his body. Here, his mind roams free, wandering as far as the horizon he sees from the highest hill. The forest becomes a quiet cathedral, a place of whispered prayers and childish dreams. On clear nights, his grandmother points to the sky and names the constellations. They lie on a worn blanket in the meadow, the grass cool beneath them, and look up at the vast, glittering expanse. She tells him old stories of the Big Dipper and the Drinking Gourd, the same stars that guided the footsteps of those seeking freedom. The night is alive with the chorus of crickets and the distant bark of a fox. Freddie feels very small beneath that immense canopy, yet somehow connected to something eternal. The whole universe seems to breathe in a slow, peaceful rhythm. He traces the patterns of the stars with his finger, as if mapping a future path that will one day lead him far beyond this quiet corner of Maryland. When he is old enough, Freddie is sent to live on the Lloyd plantation, a world of greater noise and activity. Yet even there, he finds beauty in the gardens near the great house, where roses climb white trellises and bees hum lazily in the afternoon heat. He watches the horses in the paddock, their coats gleaming like polished chestnuts, and the swans gliding on the ornamental pond. The work is hard, but in the brief moments of rest, he can gaze out over the wheat fields, the grain rippling like waves on a golden sea. He learns to carry a book of images in his mind, pictures of the natural world that no master can confiscate. These inner landscapes will sustain him through the darker days ahead. One quiet morning, a boat arrives to take him away from the only home he has known. He stands on the deck, feeling the vibration of the water beneath the hull, and watches the green shore slowly recede. The river widens, the air grows salted, and the world opens before him like a story just begun. He is bound for Baltimore, a city of brick and sail, a place where new lessons await. The sun setting over the Chesapeake paints the sky in shades of rose and lavender, and the water shimmers like a path of gold. In this peaceful moment, the boy who will become Frederick Douglass does not yet know the full shape of his destiny, but he feels the quiet stir of immense possibility, like a sail catching the first breath of wind. The city of Baltimore rises from the water in a cluster of brick and steeple, its streets waking under a soft morning haze. Frederick, now a boy of 8 years, steps off the boat and into a world entirely new. The harbor is crowded with tall ships, their masts a forest of sturdy pines, their rigging humming in the salty breeze. The aroma of the sea mixes with the smell of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery. Cobblestones worn smooth by countless wagon wheels glisten with the last traces of the night's dew. He stands in the shadow of a great brick warehouse, feeling the pulse of urban life for the first time. It is not frightening, but rather strangely lulling, a symphony of distant voices and creaking hulls that will become the backdrop of his youth. The home of Hugh and Sophia Auld is a neat row house on Alisana Street, its face unassuming yet comfortable. Inside, the rooms are clean and orderly, with wooden floors that reflect the pale sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Frederick is shown to a small space of his own, a luxury he has never known. The quiet order of the house impresses upon him a sense of calm. Here, the shouting of the overseer is absent. Instead, there is the ticking of a clock on the mantel and the soft rustle of Sophia's dress as she moves about her daily tasks. He is assigned light chores, but his eyes are constantly drawn to the books that sit on the parlor table, mysterious and unopened treasures. Sophia Auld is a gentlewoman who has never owned a slave before. In the quiet afternoons, while her husband is away at the shipyard, she takes a seat by the front window and draws the boy near. With a piece of chalk, she traces the shapes of letters on a slate, and he echoes her movements with a clumsy but eager hand. The room is hushed, the only sounds the scratching of chalk and the distant cry of a gull. Sunlight falls warmly across the pages of a small spelling book, illuminating the words that will unlock the world for him. In those tender hours, there is no barrier of color or status, only the shared delight of learning, a secret garden where they sit side by side in the amber light. One day, Hugh Auld discovers the lessons and forbids them with a stern voice. He tells his wife that teaching a slave to read is not only unlawful but dangerous, for an educated slave becomes restless and unmanageable. Frederick overhears these words from the doorway, and though his heart sinks with the loss of a teacher, a new and powerful idea kindles in his mind. In that quiet moment, he understands that literacy is the pathway from bondage to freedom. The grim pronouncement becomes, in his ears, a strange gift of hope. That night, he lies awake in his cot, hearing the creak of the house settling, and gazes at the faint line of light beneath the door, seeing it as a crack in the wall of his confinement. The streets of the Fells Point neighborhood become his new classroom. He runs errands through the bustling waterfront, where sailors speak in exotic tongues and the air is filled with the sound of hammers on oakum. The docks stretch out into the harbor like wooden fingers, and the water laps gently against the pilings. He watches the ships being loaded with barrels of flour and tobacco, their sails furled like sleeping wings. In the afternoons, the sun casts long shadows of the masts across the cobblestones, creating a moving tapestry of light and dark. He makes friends with the white boys who live nearby, and in the quiet moments between games, He pulls a scrap of paper from his pocket and asks them to explain a word or a letter. With a few pennies earned from polishing boots, he purchases a copy of the Columbian Orator, a collection of speeches and essays. This book becomes his constant companion. He sits on the edge of a wharf, his feet dangling above the water, and reads aloud in a whisper. The words roll off his tongue, their cadences stirring something deep within him. The seabirds circle overhead, and the distant bell of a buoy chimes a steady rhythm. The book introduces him to the great ideas of liberty and justice, spoken by voices from across the ages. In those solitary sessions by the bay, he feels a kinship with the orators of old, a sense that words can indeed change the world. The afternoon light softens, and he reads until the pages begin to blur in the twilight. As the city settles into the velvet dark, Frederick retreats to his small room at the back of the house. By the light of a single tallow candle, he practices writing. Using a cast-off copybook, he traces the loops and curves of letters, the pen scratching like a soft whisper. The shadows dance on the whitewashed walls, and the house is silent except for the occasional settling of a floorboard. Outside the window, a cat slips along the garden wall, its silhouette sharp against the moonlit bricks. Every mastered letter is a small victory, every word a step closer to the man he is becoming. The candle burns low, the wax pooling in a warm, translucent circle, and still he writes, driven by a hunger that knows no fatigue. One evening, he looks out the window at the full moon reflected in the quiet waters of the Patapsco Basin. The sky is a deep indigo, and the stars are faint but familiar companions. He thinks of his grandmother and the creek of his childhood, and realizes how far he has traveled without moving many miles. The power of language has expanded his inner world beyond the boundaries of the city. A great peace settles over him, a certainty that the light he has kindled can never be extinguished. He closes his book, blows out the candle, and in the sudden darkness, the world outside seems to breathe a gentle lullaby of creaking ships and lapping water. He drifts to sleep with phrases of liberty echoing softly in his mind. After several years in Baltimore, Frederick is sent back to the countryside, to a farm near the small town of St. Michael's. The change is stark, from the noisy wharves to the deep hush of the cornfields. Yet he finds a quiet solace in the familiar landscape, the long, slow roll of the land down to the Miles River. The mornings are wrapped in thick mist that clings to the low ground, softening the edges of the world. He wakes before dawn to the crow of the rooster and the distant moan of a cow. The air is clean and sweet with the smell of new-mown hay. Though the work is relentless under the summer sun, he carries his secret knowledge like a hidden lantern, the light of letters burning steadily within him. He is hired out to a shipbuilder, and his days are spent at Gardner's shipyard on the banks of the river. The yard is a symphony of manual labor. The steady thrum of the saw, the sharp crack of the adze, and the rhythmic thud of caulking mallets, sealing the whole seams with oakum and tar. Frederick learns the caulker's trade, his hands growing strong and skilled. At noon, the men rest in the shade of a great oak tree, the water before them a sheet of hammered pewter. He watches the herons stand motionless in the shallows and feels the cool breeze that sweeps up from the creek. In the quiet of that midday pause, he sometimes traces letters in the dirt with a stick, his mind always returning to the texture of words. It is in the woods beyond the fields that Frederick begins a secret school. Beneath a canopy of ancient trees, where the only eyes are those of the songbirds, he invites the other enslaved men to gather. They come after the day's labor, walking quietly along hidden paths, their footsteps muffled by the mossy earth. In the dim, golden light of the fading afternoon, they sit in a rough circle on fallen logs. Using copies of Webster's spelling book, Frederick teaches them to read. Their voices rise and fall in a low murmur, repeating syllables that will one day form the keys to their own chains. The forest cradles their efforts, its ancient silence a witness to a quiet revolution of the mind. On Sundays, a Sabbath school convenes in the same secluded grove. The sunlight filters through the leaves, dappling the pages of the worn Bibles they share. The gathering is peaceful, almost sacred, with the scent of pine and wild mint in the air. They read from the Gospels, and the words about deliverance and the coming of the kingdom take on a double meaning in their hearts. Frederick's voice, already resonant with a preacher's cadence, carries softly through the trees. There is a profound serenity in this woodland chapel, a sense of the divine presence that needs no steeple or stained glass. Even the birds seem to fall silent to listen, and for an hour, the world outside the grove feels very far away. The Book of Psalms becomes a particular source of comfort for Frederick. He reads aloud the laments and the praises, and the poetic rhythm soothes his spirit. Alone by the river's edge in the evening, he watches the sun set in ribbons of orange and pink and recites the verses from memory. The water flows steadily, a constant companion to his thoughts. He feels that the same God who parted the Red Sea could also make a way for him out of the wilderness of slavery. The language of the Bible gives shape to his own longing, transforming it from a dull ache into a clear and beautiful prayer. In the silence after, the only sound is the gentle lapping of the water against the reeds. As his knowledge grows, so does the clarity of his vision. He knows that the North Star points the way to freedom. On clear nights, after the others have gone to sleep, he steps outside the cabin and finds the star hanging low on the horizon, steady and bright. The constellations will slowly overhead, and the night air is cold and clean. He makes a plan with several trusted companions, a quiet conspiracy whispered in the darkness behind the corn crib. They will take a canoe and paddle up the Chesapeake Bay to the Free States. The thought fills him with a nervous hope, a fluttering in his chest like the wings of a caged bird testing the bars. Under the vast, silent sky, the possibility of liberty seems as real and near as the stars. The plan, however, is discovered. The men are dragged before the magistrate, but the evidence is thin, and Frederick is sent back to the shipyard rather than sold down the river. The disappointment is heavy, but it does not break his quiet resolve. He returns to the familiar rhythm of the caulker's mallet, the smell of tar, and the river's endless conversation. The days blend into a soft haze of labor and longing. He sometimes stands at the edge of the dock, watching the ships sail out toward the bay, and imagines the course of the wind. There is sadness in this waiting, but also a gritty patience. The seeds of freedom, once planted, cannot be uprooted. They merely wait beneath the soil for the right season to bloom. In the late afternoons, when the work is done and the shipyard grows quiet, Frederick sits on a pile of fresh-hewn lumber and gazes out over the water. The surface of the river is a mirror, reflecting the soft pastels of the sky. A single sailboat glides toward the horizon, its white canvas glowing in the golden light. He holds a small piece of chalk in his hand, a remnant of his teaching days, and rolls it thoughtfully between his fingers. The peace of the scene washes over him, a balm for the soul. He knows that he will try again. The river that had once carried him away from his grandmother now seems to beckon him toward a larger sea. With the coming of dusk, he rises and walks slowly back, carrying the quiet flame of his hope into the gathering night. On the 3rd day of September in 1838, the hour comes when Frederick steps quietly into the pre-dawn dark. The air is cool and damp, heavy with the scent of the bay. Dressed in a sailor's uniform sewn by his future wife, Anna, he carries the forged papers that identify him as a free seaman. The train station in Baltimore is nearly empty, lit by the flickering yellow glow of gas lamps. He boards the carriage with a heart that beats a quiet but steady rhythm, like a muffled drum. As the locomotive begins to move, the wheels clacking slowly over the rails, he looks out the window at the receding lights of the city. The sky is just beginning to blush a faint gray along the rim of the world, and a thick mist lies over the water. The train moves northward through the countryside, and Frederick watches the landscape unfold like a scroll. Misty fields of corn and tobacco give way to rolling hills dotted with white farmhouses. Cows stand motionless in the early light, and the smoke from chimneys rises straight up into the still air. He keeps his face calm, focusing on the rhythmic motion of the car, the gentle sway that rocks him like a cradle. The conductor comes through, a gruff but hurried man, and glances at Frederick's papers without much interest. The moment passes, and the train continues its steady progress. Through the window, the sun now rises fully, gilding the treetops and scattering diamonds across the surface of a passing creek. As the train crosses the invisible line into the free state of Pennsylvania, the world outside does not change its colors, but something inside Frederick does. The sky is a soft, endless blue, and the distant mountains are muted with the haze of autumn. The fields seem to stretch out with a new sense of openness, the horizon no longer a barrier but an invitation. He dares, for the first time, to breathe deeply, letting the air fill his lungs to the bottom. An elderly woman in the seat across nods off to sleep, her knitting slipping from her lap. The peaceful quiet of the compartment is a gift, a moment of pure, unalloyed existence in which he is simply a man on a journey, nothing more and nothing less. The train arrives in New York City just as the morning is fully awake. Frederick steps onto the platform and into a tidal rush of human noise and motion. But beyond the bustle, the waters of the great harbor spread out like a sheet of sapphire, dotted with the sails of ships from every corner of the earth. The Staten Island ferry steams across the bay, and gulls wheel overhead, their cries a wild and joyful chorus. Here, on these teeming streets, his status as a fugitive means he is not yet safe, but the feeling of stepping onto free soil is nonetheless profound. He walks slowly, still wearing his sailor's disguise, and the salt air is the sweetest he has ever tasted. The golden morning light warms the bricks of the buildings and casts long, soft shadows. Through the kindness of a stranger, he finds his way to the home of David Ruggles, a free black abolitionist who lives on Lisbonid Street. The house is modest, its rooms filled with books and the scent of brewing tea. Mr. Ruggles welcomes him with a calm, steady voice and a firm handshake, showing him to a small but comfortable room at the back. For the first time in his life, Frederick closes a door and knows that no master will enter without his consent. The simple luxury of that solitude is overwhelming. He sits on the edge of the bed, the mattress soft beneath him, and listens to the ordinary sounds of the city drifting in through the open window, a horse's hooves, a child's laughter, a distant church bell. That afternoon, he writes a letter to Anna, who is still in Baltimore. His pen moves carefully over the paper, each word a brick in the new home he is building for them both. He tells her to come north, to meet him in New York so they can be married in freedom. The light through the lace curtains makes patterns on the desk, and the room is hushed. Outside, a vendor calls out the price of apples, and the sound is oddly comforting. He seals the letter with a borrowed wafer and hands it to Mr. Ruggles for safe posting. Then he lies down for a moment, and his eyes grow heavy. The accumulated exhaustion of a lifetime seems to pour out of him into the soft pillow, and he sleeps a deep, dreamless sleep, the first true rest of a free man. A few days later, Anna arrives. Their reunion is quiet and profound. They stand together in the small parlor, holding hands, not saying much, for their hearts are too full. She is the same steady, gentle woman he has always known, her eyes bright with tears of relief. They walk to the home of the Reverend James Pennington, a man who has also known the bite of chains, and there, in a simple ceremony, they are married. The room is lit by the soft glow of candles, and the vows they speak are older than any nation. Afterwards, they step out into the cool evening air, and the city around them sparkles with the lights of 1,000 windows. They walk back slowly, side by side, two souls now legally and spiritually bound in a land that has promised them nothing but opportunity. With the help of their new friends, Frederick and Anna make plans to move farther north, to the whaling town of New Bedford in Massachusetts. The morning of their departure, a carriage takes them along the coast. The road winds through small villages and past quiet inlets, the sea always visible on the horizon, a thin blue line between the green hills and the sky. Frederick watches the landscape with new eyes, the eyes of a man who can now choose his own path. The rhythm of the horse's hooves is a soothing lullaby. As the sun begins to set, the whole world is awash in a warm, amber glow, and the sound of the evening tide fills the air. In the fading light, he takes Anna's hand, and they ride on into the gathering dusk, toward the peaceful harbor that will become their first home in freedom. The town of New Bedford rises from the shore like a cluster of whitewashed hope, its streets laid out in a neat grid lined with elm trees. The air carries the tang of salt and the distant echo of ship hammers. Frederick and Anna step down from the carriage onto cobbled streets that gleam with the residue of whale oil, making the stones shimmer like dark jewels. The houses are tidy and well-kept, with small front gardens where late summer roses still bloom. Whalebone fences and oil lamps on every corner speak of the industry that built this town. In the soft, late afternoon light, the whole scene has the quality of a painting, a peaceful tableau of a community where free Black families have carved out a life of dignity and purpose. They are welcomed into the home of Nathan and Polly Johnson, a prominent Black couple whose house on 7th Street is a safe harbor for those fleeing the South. The guest room is small but clean, with a window that overlooks a quiet backyard where a pear tree sheds its leaves. Frederick unpacks their few belongings and places the Columbian Orator on the bedside table. For the first time, he can sleep with his name officially changed to Frederick Douglass, a new identity to match his new life. The house is filled with the comforting aroma of baking bread and the soft murmur of the Johnsons' conversation. At night, lying beside Anna, he listens to the distant foghorn and feels a profound, settling peace, as if the whole town is gently rocking him to sleep. Work on the wharves comes naturally to him. He finds employment as a caulker, but he also unloads ships and sweeps warehouses, his hands never idle. The docks are a forest of tall masts, their rigging singing in the wind. He works alongside Portuguese, Cape Verdean, and free Black sailors, a small community of the sea. The rhythm of the labor is soothing, the scrape of the shovel, the thump of the casks, the call of the foreman all blend into a steady, purposeful heartbeat. At noon, he eats his lunch sitting on a coil of rope, watching the waves slap gently against the pilings. The sun glints off the water in 1,000 bright points, and seagulls hover overhead, their cries of pleasant music that fills the salty air. The great whaling ships that rest in the harbor are marvels of timber and canvas. He often walks along the waterfront in the evening, studying their intricate rigging and the names painted on their prows, the Confidence, the Elizabeth, the Sunbeam. The smell of whale oil is strong, but not unpleasant, a rich, deep scent that speaks of long voyages and the vast, mysterious depths of the ocean. The setting sun turns the sails to gold, and the reflections of the ships lie perfectly still on the water. In these quiet walks, he feels the vastness of the world and the small, but secure place he now occupies within it. The sea has become a symbol of both escape and boundless possibility, its horizon a constant promise. On Sundays, Frederick and Anna attend the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, a modest wooden building filled with the warmth of community. The pews are worn smooth by years of faithful use, and the windows catch the afternoon light, casting pale amber and blue tints onto the faces of the congregation. The singing rises in rich, rolling harmonies, songs of praise and deliverance that have traveled from the cotton fields to this peaceful sanctuary. Frederick takes his place among the worshippers, his deep voice joining in the familiar hymns. The hour is one of profound tranquility, a balm for the scars of the past. As the last notes fade and the pastor offers a gentle benediction, there is a shared breath of peace that settles over the entire assembly. It is here in New Bedford that Frederick first reads The Liberator, the abolitionist newspaper published by William Lloyd Garrison. He sits on a wooden bench overlooking the harbor, the paper spread out before him, and feels as though a great drum has sounded in his soul. The words are fiery yet precise, calling for immediate emancipation. He reads and rereads each issue, absorbing the arguments and the moral clarity. The sea breeze flutters the pages, and he has to hold them down with a smooth stone. Between the lines, he begins to hear the cadences of his own future speeches, a voice that has been growing within him since the days under the oak tree. The afternoon light softens, and he stays until the stars come out, the paper a quiet companion under the vast, darkening sky. In the summer of 1841, he attends a large anti-slavery convention on the island of Nantucket. The meeting hall is filled with the murmur of earnest conversation and the rustle of bonnets and coats. When he is unexpectedly called upon to speak, he rises with a flutter of nervousness. But as he begins to share the simple, unadorned story of his life in slavery, the room falls completely still. His voice is not loud, but it carries the steady, soft power of a river. He speaks of the stars seen through the cracks of the slave cabin, of the alphabet learned by candlelight, of the taste of freedom on the New York dawn. The audience listens in a trance, and when he finishes, there is a long, hushed silence, followed by a gentle, respectful applause that feels like rain on still water. Back in New Bedford, life resumes its quiet pace. In the evenings, Frederick sits at a small desk by the second-floor window, writing letters and practicing the speeches that are now in demand. Anna moves quietly about the room, tending to their two young children, Rosetta and Louis. The soft lamplight pools on the worn floorboards, and the faint sound of a fiddle drifts from the house next door. He pauses in his writing to watch his family, the simple domestic scene filling him with a contentment sharper than any joy he has ever known. The road ahead is long, and the fight for justice will call him again, but in this moment, in the peaceful harbor of their first real home, there is only the quiet breath of gratitude, the steady rhythm of a life restored. Many years pass, and Frederick Douglass becomes a man known on 2 continents, his voice a steady flame in the long night of slavery. He settles for a time in Rochester, New York, where the roar of the Genesee River waterfalls fills the air. Here he establishes his own newspaper, the North Star, so named for the celestial guide that had pointed him toward freedom. The printing office is a long, low room filled with the scent of ink and paper, the press clattering in a soothing, rhythmic cadence. Through the window, the snow falls gently on the streets in winter, muffling the world in a blanket of white. He works late into the night, editing articles and writing editorials, the candle beside him a small sun in the quiet darkness. In his later years, he purchases a handsome house perched on a hill in the Anacostia neighborhood of Washington, D.C. Cedar Hill, as it is called, commands a sweeping view of the capital city, the dome of the Capitol rising like a pale bubble in the distance. The house is large and comfortable, with wide porches and a library that becomes his sanctuary. The walls are lined with books, many of them gifts from admirers, their spines a mosaic of brown and gold. Afternoon sun floods the room through tall windows, illuminating the dust motes that drift lazily in the still air. In this quiet eyrie, far above the turmoil of the political battles he has fought, he can finally rest and reflect on the long arc of his journey. The grounds of Cedar Hill are a peaceful park with grassy slopes and ancient oak trees that throw pools of deep shade. Anna, his wife of many years, tends a garden of roses and lilacs with patient, loving hands. The fragrance of the blossoms drifts up to the study window on warm afternoons. Gravel paths wind through the property, and Frederick often strolls along them, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind turning over the sentences of his latest speech or book. A birdbath glistens in the sun, visited by sparrows and robins. Beyond the fence, the city hums faintly, a distant murmur that only deepens the sense of retreat. The garden becomes a metaphor for the life he has cultivated, tender, carefully tended, blooming against all odds. In the study, he takes up his pen to write the third and final version of his autobiography, The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. The desk is an old, steady companion, its surface worn smooth by decades of writing. Through the window, the branches of a cedar tree frame a view of the river, a silver ribbon winding through the green landscape. He writes slowly, his thoughts meandering back to the boy on the Tuckahoe Creek and the young man on the Baltimore wharves. The act of writing is now a calm, reflective pleasure rather than an urgent duty. The scratching of the pen is a soft, regular sound, like the ticking of a clock. Each page is a gentle laying down of memory, a bridge between the past and the peaceful present. Visitors come to Cedar Hill in a slow, steady stream, young journalists, fellow abolitionists, and neighbors seeking advice. He receives them on the broad, shady porch, in a rocking chair that creaks a gentle welcome. They sit together, sipping cool lemonade, and the conversation drifts from politics to poetry, from old battles to the quiet beauty of the sunset. He speaks in the same resonant, measured tones that once held audiences of thousands spellbound, but now the voice is softer, worn to a comfortable polish. A cat curls up on the porch railing, purring in the afternoon heat. In these unhurried dialogues, there is a profound sense of fulfillment, the exchange of wisdom passed like a warm loaf of bread from one hand to another. As the day draws to a close, he takes his customary walk through the garden. The sky above the Capitol is a canvas of rose and gold, and the air has cooled to a perfect, gentle temperature. The crickets begin their evening chorus, a steady, chirping rhythm that fills the dusk. He pauses by the lily pond, looking down at the still water, and sees his own reflection, an old man with a halo of white hair, but with eyes that still hold the glimmer of the boy who watched the dragonflies on the creek. The reflection ripples as a frog slips beneath the surface and then reforms, calm and whole. He takes a deep breath, smelling the mingled scents of earth, blossom, and distant rain, and feels the quiet satisfaction of a life lived fully and freely. Today, Cedar Hill remains much as he left it. The study is preserved as a quiet shrine, the books still on the shelves, the desk still facing the window. The afternoon light still floods in with the same golden quality, touching the personal artifacts, a pen, a pair of spectacles, a walking cane. Visitors walk through the rooms in hushed reverence, feeling the echo of his presence in the silence. Outside, the garden is still tended, the roses blooming in the same profusion that Anna once cultivated. The great city below has grown and changed, but the hilltop remains a pocket of timeless peace, a place where one can sit on the porch and imagine the measured, calm voice of Frederick Douglass still speaking gently on the breeze. Let us end our story with the house at dusk, as the lamps are lit one by one. The windows glow with warm amber light, and the oak tree's silhouette is etched against the fading sky. Downstairs, a fire crackles, wood smoke drifting up to the study. The house is quiet after a long day of remembering. Stars appear, the same that guided a young man northward. The wind in the pines carries the echo of a voice that changed the world. But here, in this peaceful hour, it is not the demand we hear, but the soft whisper of a life transformed, one word at a time. Sleep well, and know that the light of freedom, once lit, never truly goes out.